I'm going to begin our lecture today discussing pages 15 to 25 of Think of our class book. So I'm just going to leaf through the pages and let you, I'll think aloud as I'm looking through it. And the things you should know here, of course, are, Blackboard does a really good job. Blackboard, it just being articulate and easy to understand, and really giving you the terms and the notions that are current, like the evil demon and the cogito, ergo sum. Now, one thing you should know about the cogito, or the cogito as it's often referred to, cogito, is that Descartes didn't really, in translation, the translations that we've run into so far, and they're not going to be so prosaic with the statement, I think, therefore I am. Okay, Descartes put it in different ways, but it's at the top of the second meditation, where the cogito is, and it's more of a notion than anything, and the notion being that I may be deceived about everything and anything, but I am deceived in my thoughts. So in order to be deceived, I must first have thoughts. So that proved to Descartes that he had a mind, and it is in this mind of his that he senses his identity lies. And hang on just a second here. When he talks about the ball of wax, that is more or less his which I believe may have happened at an earlier reading. But the ball of wax idea is Descartes'. Well, no, actually, it's in page 2021. It's Descartes' attempt to prove the possibility that the self is known intellectually, not in imagination or in sensory experience. Now, imagination for a lot of literature, Western literature, do not connotate flights of fancy like it might be now, or daydreaming or something like that. The imagination was that faculty of the mind that was able to work with images. So when he talks about using his imagination, he's not asking you to creatively think of some flights of fancy or whatnot, but what he is saying is, can you see the pictures in your mind? So let's just work with it right now. Can we see a rooster? Okay, now take the head of the rooster and put a dog's head on it, and then take the legs of the rooster and put robot legs, and then on the tail put a big scorpion tail. Can you see your creature there? So but keep the wings. Okay, so we use our imagination to remember. Okay, member entities and images we're familiar with, to remember them into an unfamiliar entity. But if you look at the entity as a whole, would be unfamiliar, but the parts, we would be very familiar with those parts. In fact, Descartes would argue that we couldn't imagine any part that we hadn't prior seen before. So okay, so you put some robot legs on the rooster. Had you seen those legs on a robot? Well, no, but I bet it was like a cylinder and maybe a ball joint and maybe like a square metal squares, or I don't know. If you look at the parts of the leg, you realize you've seen every one of those parts, the nuts, the ball. You just kind of put them all together. So that's the faculty, the skill of your imagination. And Descartes is saying, even when you look at the ball of wax, he wants us to realize we're not even using imagery here, because everything that we had received sensory-wise from the ball of wax, and of course he's pulling from a very common thing back then, the wax that would be used for men of letters, for their correspondence and whatnot. But didn't he say that he still smelled it from the flowers? Well, the beeswax, okay, but you know, how many of us have big balls of beeswax rolling around our house? So, but you understand. I mean, you got it there, and you know, this ball of wax went through a complete transformation in terms of its accidental, what Descartes would call its accidental qualities. Accidental would mean the stuff that actually changes, but in such a way that it does not enable us to say we have a new thing. Okay, so like the color of the wax ball would change, but Descartes would say, is this the same wax ball? Or the shape might change, but Descartes would say, and we would agree, it's the same wax. So that which can change and not change the essence of the thing is going to be termed as an accidental. It has nothing to do with an accident like what happens out there when you run into a tree or something with your car. But you have the essentials and you have the accidentals. The accidentals are those things that you can lose and still maintain the essentials. So it appears that all the sensory qualities, the thump, the consistency, the solidity, all right, the color and the weight and all that of that ball of wax changes. So Descartes is going to say we don't know the ball of wax through these things. We don't. So how do we know? But he also admits that we're totally convinced that it's the same thing. And Descartes is going to ask us, well, how do we know this? And now, to me, that question seems to be just glossing over the notion of time, because time transpired as that wax shifted. And had we kept our eyes on that wax, we would have seen the manifestation of the changes very minutely. So the ball of wax might have been perfectly round, and then as it got close to the fire, 10 seconds later, it may have lost a micro measurement of that roundness as it began to sag and expand. But we would not pick that up. To us, that change would be very fluid. It would be like a picture. Okay, so if you look, or not a picture, a movie. Okay, if you stop the movie, think of the old reel, okay, going, and you slowed it down, and you could actually see the frame by frame by frame. You realize that the change would be so incremental, it would be able individually to almost slide under our sensory radar. But collectively, given the right flow of time and speed of the reel, we would see it in process as a motion, but we would understand, right, that it's really still, S-T-I-L-L, still pictures. That's physically only what it is. We are receiving the illusion of motion and of time transpiring. So, you know, you might be able to, Descartes might say that, or we could say to Descartes that his certainty that it's the same ball of wax is really based on the notion that he was able to see all the incremental changes. So he was able to by the warrant of resemblance, say, okay, this ball of wax on frame number 2 looks very much like the ball of wax on frame number 1, so I'm going to say it is the same ball of wax. And then look at frame 3, that ball of wax, man, it looks really a lot like the ball of wax on frame 2, so I'm going to say it is the same ball of wax. Now, we have troubles if we go from frame 1 to frame 1000. We say, whoa, look at frame 1. I mean, look what you see there. Look at frame 1000. Oh, that's nothing like the ball of wax. So it seems to me that as Descartes was presenting his argument this way, he jumps from frame 1 to frame 1000. But he also knows that he gets all of the frames because he tells you he has no doubt that it's the same ball of wax. But he says he knows it. He knows it intelligently. Through his intelligence. Okay, so what I guess what I kind of just threw out there right there is that I might be able to question Descartes in the sense of saying to him, you are really basing your knowledge still, if you're looking at the ball of wax and saying at the end product is still the same as the first product. What you are really working on is a notion of close resemblance. Seems to be for you enough proof of identity. If the resemblance is very close, and there doesn't seem to be any substitution that happened in that physical space. Like no one snuck in and switched that ball of wax out quickly for another one, because the doors were locked. So there doesn't seem to be any notion of substitution. Then it's I believe you're basing your statement that it's the same ball of wax on really the notion that very close micro resemblances will give you the assumption to say it's the same one. But really, we're still kind of beside the point here, because he doesn't even have to use the ball of wax. He has a point to make. The point to make is some things are known through the mind. Okay? Through the mind. And in fact, okay, am I even going to get through these 10 pages? 15 to 25. It's the same. And he didn't even have to use the ball of wax, because there's a better illustration of this that happened in antiquity, and it's the illustration of the Athenian ship. Okay, and the Athenian ship was the ship that Athens used to send its virgin sacrifices to the Minotaur on Crete. And every year that ship went out with the black sails, and it had 7 or 9. It was a single number, single-digit number of virgins that were going to, men and women, that were going to be just given to the Minotaur in the labyrinth, and he was going to find them and eat them. And he did this every year, until finally Theseus, right, goes, and with Ariadne and the string, and the Ariadne string, was able to find his way back from the labyrinth, and he kills the Minotaur. Okay. Well, anyway, this Athenian ship was a sacred ship, and Plato poses the question through Socrates. Every year, the ship, as it got older, had to have parts of its body replaced. Okay. And so, 1 year it might be certain planks along the front, and this next year certain planks around the bow, and the helm was replaced, and then the mast, and eventually, okay, the point was, eventually every single piece of lumber from the original ship had been replaced already. So Socrates asked the question, is this the same ship? Is it the same ship? And one might say, well, yes, I know it's the same ship, but intellectually I know it, because I have to admit that the individual material parts are different. And think about your body. I mean, I don't know the exact months or whatnot, but isn't it the case that every human cell is reproduced, and is a different cell every 6 months? Is it? You can find this out on Google, and whether it's 6 months or 6 years, the point still remains, all the cells you had that made up your body, let's go 6 months ago, are not the same cells now. So now I don't know if this actually applies to brain cells, but the point being, if 99% of you has been completely changed out for new cells like that, how do you know you're still the same you? So some things, it seems that we do hold their definition mentally as an intelligent definition. A definition held only by the intelligence, not by the senses, but derived and extrapolated perhaps from thinking about our sensory experiences, but not ultimately dependent upon them. And so Descartes already has proved his own existence. All right, but he wants to more carefully examine the very warrant for that, and the warrant is then that some things are known by the intelligence. Okay, and if what better thing can you know through your intelligence than its own intelligence? So having established that, it's not a leap for him then to say that he knows that God exists. If God is a being that is to be known by the intelligence, then Descartes can look to that for proofs, even though the sensory and not worry about the fact that he's not receiving sensory evidence for this, because the sensory evidence, remember, by the evil demon, could be wrong. Okay, so I want to point out something here on page 22 here. Now this is I don't know if this will ever go into a second edition, but it's the Oxford University Press. It's the only press that would be able to print this book because it's not public domain. So, and it's copyright 1999. It's not been reprinted. That's the only time when we would run into different page numbers. So I'm at page 22 here. Motivations and questions. Oh, wait a minute. Page 24. When Blackburn asks Descartes, he sort of takes Descartes to task a little bit and says, look, do our senses really deceive us all the time? Isn't it the case that when we simply glance at something or see something afar off, we are mistaken? I see someone out there, that's my mom, hey, or that's my husband, or that's my child, and wait a minute, that's not my child. When we get closer, we realize, oh, that's not our child. Or we might, from a distance, see something that looks like a circle, but once we get 500 yards closer, we realize, oh, this is an octagon. And we might also look at something and then stare at it longer and glance at it longer and look at it from another angle until we realize, I know what that is, right? So now I'm not deceived. So Blackburn is saying basically that he believes Descartes has a little bit of problems, that Descartes is not necessarily wrong, but not just not obviously wrong, but not so obviously right. Because Blackburn is thinking that Descartes might be slandering the senses by saying that although sometimes we are mistaken, is it really upon closer examination and a more rich examination, aren't we often correct? But I think Blackburn then is missing the power of the evil demon. I mean, Descartes is saying this evil demon, no matter how closely you can see that thing that looks like a pencil, and no matter how close you hold it to yourself, smell it, taste it, I don't know what a pencil, actually I guess I do know what a pencil tastes like, given my adventurous time in 5th grade, but just look at this thing. I'm not confused. I'll put it under nice light, but Descartes is saying the evil demon is giving you the perfect sensory compilation of a pencil, but it might not really be there. See, your desire to want to move beyond the sensory compilation, which includes pressure on your finger and movement and all that, that is a full and rich deception. And we tend to think that when we put it down like this and close your eyes, it still exists because it's a thing in itself. But Descartes is saying, you don't know, because the evil demon is so complete in his deception and so able to provide a rich sensory experience. I don't care how long you look at it. The virtue of the definition of the virtue of the evil demon, his power, is to utterly deceive you this way. And then, on page 22, Blackburn comes around and says, Descartes is also kind of has a fallacy going here. And now Blackburn is kind of playing fair with Descartes. I do think he's doing that, but I don't know if I really agree with what he says there, because he talks about the banknotes. I'm looking at page 22. And the newspapers. See, he says he renders Descartes' idea like this: the senses sometimes deceive us. So for all that we know, they always deceive us. By the way, do you have a cup of coffee with you or something cold, or so that you can be paying attention in the videos? Because what you should be carrying away from this is, I'm trying to model for you a method of thinking. And I believe it is tremendously important. I also believe I'm fully capable of being mistaken myself. So you should be critically hearing this. And it's slow and steady work, but you have to be able to convince yourself that the ends, the dividends at the end, are the returns, the rewards at the end, are worth the mental exercising this is. Okay. And you need to pay attention and to stay with me, because you're working through these concepts. You're working through them. And it is really a labor of diligence and devotion that should be carried out 5, 10, 15 years. Okay. So what are we doing for this, 1 hour a week thing for 1 year? Well, that's a great start. Okay. The fact that you might not be getting it right now doesn't mean you won't get it if you just go through this first run, and then you go back and you run through it again, and you run through it again. Now, you all know that there are plenty of things that really hold your attention well and entertain you well, and that you can go to those things for a mental break, which I believe is necessary. The rest from musing that the amusement gives us allows us to come back with strength again to our musings. So just as sleep allows us to continually function in our awake moments, go and get those amusements so that you can come back here and muse with me. All right. And the returns are not, don't let yourself miss out on that. All right. And what I mean by that is, well, I guess the best thing to do is you'll find out for yourself if you continue at this. All right. But part of continuing at it is to develop the ability to just listen and think with me. All right. So don't let yourself wander. I don't know why I digressed into that, but there you have it. Okay, so he says the senses sometimes deceive us. So for all we know, they always deceive us. Now, Descartes does say this, but then Blackburn says this: newspapers sometimes make mistakes. Okay, so for all we know, they always make mistakes. So newspapers sometimes make mistakes. For all we know, what are we going to call the newspapers' mistakes? We would call them lies. Let's just call them lies. Now let's not worry about intentional lies or unintentional lies. If the statement in the newspaper, right, because he's talking about the propositions of the newspaper, don't correspond to reality, then they're false. So he is saying newspapers, if they're false once somewhere down the line, then maybe they're false all the time. However, then he says it's also kind of like this. Okay. Some banknotes are forgeries, so for all we know, they're all forgeries. Here the conclusion is impossible, since the very notion of a forgery presupposes valid notes or coins. Yes, indeed. See, I don't think the analogy holds. This is what, and we may come to this when we talk about Kant, okay, and his categorical imperatives, but I don't know how far we're going to get in this class. But the question here is, can you have a lie if there is nowhere ever a truth? Okay, so if nothing is true, the stuff you have, you shouldn't really call them lies, because the definition of lie depends on the prior existence of truth. See, so if you take away all truth, you've also destroyed lies. Now you are left with a bunch of propositions that don't correspond to reality, but you can't call them lies, because the definition of lie grounds itself in the definition of truth. It's the same thing with bad. If you took away all goodness, could you say what is left is bad? You couldn't, because the only way you recognize badness is to contrast it against the good. And if you take away the good, now you might be saying, "Whoa, yeah, of course I remember what the good was like." But think of someone who, okay, let's just say all the goodness of the world disappears and all that is left is bad. Well, let's just just go with let's just say, okay, let's just say that well, let me try to stay with this example. All the true propositions disappeared, and all we had left were lies. We might remember that there once existed a relationship against which these things we are left with were contrasted against. And against that contrast, recognizable. But if let's just say someone who was just born into a world of that condition and never knew the truth before, he might not know what we meant when we call this those things that are not true. The definition of lie, that which is not true. He would know lie, the word lie, is just an abstract symbol, but he would not be able to remember that it is that which is not true. It's like this, okay? Let's say you have a white wall, okay? A white wall. And you had now the experiment, now it's getting a little more hairy. Okay, here we go. Let's go with an iPad, okay? Let's go with an iPad. Let's pretend that the whole world was filled with blackness, and that rain came down as black drops. Okay, so rain, how would you know then that the thing was actually black? You would know it because you could remember all the other colors, and you could in particular remember white. Okay, now let's just pretend then that you had like an iPad in this black world, an iPad, or a screen that was white light coming from the screen, and you could hold it up, and as the black raindrops fell, you could see the black raindrops, and that's what that black raindrop look at that's black, and you see that it's black when it's against the white. Okay, but now let's just suppose that glass that was emitting that white light just cracked and died, or the battery, whatever, and for the whole world then there was no more of that white light, and it was completely black. Someone born into that world in that condition would not know the concept of black. That's what I'm trying to say, because the concept of black is known against that white background, just as the concept, because we would define black as in now I know that it might not be truly that way in the color world, but as that the opposite of white, not white. Man, that's really not that good. But anyway, you wouldn't know the concept of lies, right? You would not know even what the concept was unless you also before that had experience of what truth was. Okay? Not if you're going to define lies as that which is not true. That would make no sense to you unless you also know what truth was. Okay, so now when you come then and say that forgeries, and he's right on this, the bank forgery would not be able to be called a forgery if in the whole universe there existed not a single correct banknote. If all of them are forgeries, then you don't have any forgeries, because you need that right banknote. So to be the board against which, or the grounds from which, the notion of a false note springs. That's a pretty tightly constrained example of complementary classes. Okay, complementary classes take pencil is the class. All things that are pencils belong in the class. The complementary class is all things that are not pencils. So what's the complementary class of pencils? Everything in the world is not a pencil. Blackburn is playing with complementary classes here, and Now I want you to go back to, in other words, what is the definition of truth, and what is the definition of lie? Is the definition of lie founded upon the definition of truth? Yes. Okay, now let's talk about senses. What is the definition of sense? Of a sensory data? Okay. All right. Now, the sensory data that's incorrect is that is its definition founded in the definition of sensory data, or is it founded in the definition of falsity? It's founded in the definition of falsity, not in the definition of sensory data. So I actually think that Descartes still wins the day here when he says, if one sensory experience has deceived us, it is possible then that we are deceived all the time. Now notice he didn't say it is the case that we are deceived all the time. It is possible then that we are deceived all the time. Now what Blackburn is saying is this: if there is one false banknote, then that is proof, if you're going to call it false, that there also exists a true banknote. But Blackburn is playing on the definitions of false and true. Okay, but by the very nature of the banknote depends on truth. That one right banknote out there for it to exist. But I don't see that happening with a false with sensory data. Sensory data depends on senses and the medium upon which the data transfers. The sound wave, the physical world. It doesn't depend on notions of false or truth. So I think Blackburn is himself involved in a fallacy here. Now, you know, I realize that the time is 30 minutes. Okay. And was there anything else I needed to cover here? I mean, there's plenty of stuff. I want to end. I will end now, though. That what I just illustrated for you here, and I am utterly convinced that Blackburn is incorrect here. Okay, so if Blackburn were sitting right here in front of me, I would still hold this opinion. Now, I might not have the courage to enter into a discussion about this with him. It just depends on how I feel, I guess, that day. But I would still think that I'm right on this. Okay, so now you have two people, okay, that disagree on something, and we are both in an authoritative position. I will admit, though, I have not had a philosophy book that I've written be published by Oxford University Press. So one authority figure seems to have more credentials, right? But you know as well as I do that automatically assenting to the authority figure that has more credentials is a very, very dangerous modus operandi for anybody to do, right? Because at that point, who else would be the better deceiver but he who has the most credentials? So we certainly by definition say that he who has the most credentials has had most recognized experience and output. I notice I'm not saying experience and output, I'm saying recognized experience and output. But I present this as two thinkers, Blackburn and Horne, and I've given you this, and I ask you now, who are you going to believe? So see, that's the problem with the soft sciences, is that the authority positions are not so easily determined and maintained. And the experience of being an audience to conflicting authorities is going to become, not just in this class, but in your academic experience, more common to you than perhaps you may realize now. So the burden is still on you to think about these things, all right, and to slowly realize that starting by the definitions and by nailing down some of the basic rules of propositional logic, you yourself can make headway into this, all right, so that you become the discerning person also, and then you can decide who's right, me or whether I'm right or Blackburn. But it's a tricky thing, isn't it? And I wonder whether that's not also an essential quality of being human, is at the end of the day owning a set of convictions that you can articulate as to why you own them, the grounds upon which you own them, and that you can. And I'm not saying that reason convinces you into a position, but you ought to be able to articulate why a position, given the givens. Okay, so if God is a given for you, given God, or given whatever to you appears to be your given, although you might be wrong about that, you can articulate why you hold to this or to that because of the givens that you embrace. All right, and I think if that is what you begin to develop in this class, it will be a term well spent. All right, so let's just continue thinking together. All right, thank you for listening. I know I went over. Appreciate it.